All right, good morning, everybody. Let me see if I can.
Morning.
Thank you all so much for being here. I'm still admitting people, so give us just half of a second. We appreciate again your time here with the committee. As we start to think about potential changes to the UDO, it's just been years and years and years and years in the works, and so and a lot of you have been involved for a number of years. So just wanted to, say we appreciate your time and your commitment to continuing to make this a better and better document meeting the needs of the city. Today we're going to focus on compact development. So as I think most of you know, we recognize that we're missing a tool in the UDO that helps promote housing supply in the form of subdivisions. And the compact development form is really intended to be a tool that in some ways is replacing and updating the cluster provisions that we had in the past. We are going to get pretty technical in this presentation, and we've tried to put in some things with some densities and things like that, just to help, particularly those that aren't operating in the weeds of this, even myself. And I feel like I'm fairly development savvy, even just looking at some of the lot sizes and lot widths. It's hard for me even sometimes to visualize exactly what that looks like in reality. And so we've tried to put some things in there to kind of help make it relatable. But I know there's a broad variety of people that probably are really comfortable with technical standards and probably people that aren't. And so just please don't feel shy to, just stop us and ask questions, because we really want to hear from everyone today as we move forward with this. Because this is, I was telling Monica earlier today, there's lots of peer cities out there that have implemented duplexes and triplexes in an infill situation. But I think Charlotte in some ways is a pioneer in that we have a lot of available land for development that, like Minneapolis as an example, doesn't have it all, and Austin has very limited amounts. And so we're starting to figure out how to apply these things in a larger scale development plan in subdivisions. And so we don't have a lot of models to look at. And so, we've been doing testing, we've been talking to a lot of people, and you all are a very important part of this process. So please, please give us your feedback. Right now, we anticipate or expect that there are almost 12,000 acres of developable land that are 2 acres or more within the city and the unincorporated parts of Mecklenburg County that could utilize this development standards. And we expect that most of them will use this instead of the base development standards and conservation, which is really intended to be used for sites that have environmental features. So this will be the primary tool for new subdivisions. So it is important that we get it right. You'll see we're moving really quickly. And the reason for that is that we do think it's an important tool to have in place sooner than later. And we've got council going out on break for all of July and until August the 19th. And we really don't want to wait until August and September to get this approved. So we're moving quickly because we think it's important, and really looking forward to the discussion. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Monica, and she's going to do the presentation this morning, and looking forward to hearing what your thoughts are. So thank you again.
Okie dokie. Happy Thursday, everyone. I am going to get this pulled up and get my screen shared and walk through this. Okay. Are you guys seeing it as a slide presentation or as the...
We're seeing the presentation view.
Okay, good. Just making sure. I feel like it gets really wonky when you have 3 screens and you're trying to make sure you're showing the right one. So, okay, good.
No, Monica, yeah. We're seeing your view. We're not seeing.
Oh, shoot. Okay, not the presentation view. Okay, here. Let me make sure that I have it done right. Okay. should have done it before. Now that's better, right?
Yes, that's good.
Okay, cool. Thanks. I got presentation view. I was interpreting that as the as like the right view. So, okay, I think we're good now. So today what we're going to talk about, as Allison said, please, it will get technical quickly. And we are in the weeds of this all day, every day. So feel free to drop questions in the chat as I go, or, raise your hand and we can kind of take it as it comes. There are not a ton of slides, so there is a lot of information on each slide. So therefore, feel free to ask questions as we go. And I'm trying to make sure we save time for some good discussion. So the way this will work is I'll just review the timeline and kind of overview as to where we're going, why right now, which Allison alluded to that just a minute ago. Again, an overview of kind of all the districts, the way we see them unfolding. And when I say future districts, we're obviously really focused on that N1, A, B, C, D, all the N1 districts. I'll show you some key questions that we have and regarding compact so that you can write those down and kind of come back to those and think about them. And then we'll talk through, I want to put compact into context of all the different tools that we have currently, the tools we had prior to July 1, 2023, or excuse me, June 1, 2023. And then we'll talk through some of the process engagement and things we've done thus far. And then what we'll do is revisit those questions that we had before and have some discussion around them. And then we'll talk through our recommendations and next steps. So what we are focusing on today is that middle portion, the compact. So just as a reminder, we have 3 phases that we see as important of this neighborhood 1 package relook, which is conservation first. So that is going to council on May 20th. That's really purpose is for those sites with constraints on them. Phase 2, which again, going before the end of June for vote, is the goal to focus on this modern housing supply. And that's what the majority of today will focus on. And then 3, which is what we will be working on over the summer and fall, that focuses on some of the things I even heard in the feedback session on last Tuesday, but flexibility around ADUs, cottage courts, how we allow for townhouses, and where we are across all N1 districts with duplexes, triplex will all be addressed and have conversations around in that phase 3. So just a reminder of why compact. We really need to look at kind of what people are building, what are modern construction techniques, what we saw in the years prior to even the implementation of the UDO, and how we can reconcile that with the existing lot patterns in our existing neighborhoods. So the lot standards in the UDO are reflective of existing neighborhoods. So R3 converted to N1A, and that's 10,000 square foot lots. I'll show that in a minute, but that's kind of a larger lot size and something that we have seen historically that doesn't really match what we've seen in more recent years, which is closer to what you see on the right, where you see smaller units, even in the single family lots. You see more of a demand for the duplexes, and you just see in general a smaller lot pattern type. So that's where compact comes in. It's really meant to be used for larger sites, so sites over 2 acres that reflect those more modern building standards. So for people who are more visual, this is kind of how we see the different residential types playing out over time. So you can see here that we see that first, that's existing kind of base development, what I was just talking about. These are where you have infill sites less than 2 acres. Then the conservation, which is the middle where you have those environmental features, that's what's going. And then compact on that far right, where you allow that smaller lotting pattern. So we're going to talk a little bit about each of these. What we are specifically talking about today and in the draft that we sent to you all, and what we would like to propose, this is the applicability as it reads today in the draft, is that you would be able to use compact in all N1A, B, C, D zoning districts. So on sites over 2 acres. Now, one thing that we are trying to work within is that what we don't want to happen is, and what we think we've heard from the community, so this will be a discussion question for later, is people assembling multiple lots within an existing neighborhood and combining, 1/4 acre lots or 1/3 acre lots to create a lot that is 2 acres and then be able to use this tool. So the way it is currently written is that you have to have at least one parcel that is 2 acres as of the adoption and the implementation date of the UDO June 1st, 2023, so that you can't assemble those smaller parcels. So we're still working a little bit exactly how to achieve that goal. But the bottom line is that what we want to happen is that you're not going out and taking the middle of a neighborhood and combining that to make 2 acres. You need to start with at least one lot that has 2 acres, and then you can add to it smaller lots. So one conversation we've had, and again, we can come back and talk about this, is that when you're on an arterial, is there more flexibility there? So that would be something we would be interested in your feedback. Where you're not allowed to use compact, again, this is in the proposed district, is within the airport nose disclosure overlay and the critical protected watershed. So that's everything you see over here on this western edge. And the reasoning for that is we want to make sure we're protecting our natural resources with the critical and protected watershed. And within the airport noise overlay, we really don't want to encourage more residential development. There's a large number of properties that have already been purchased. There's a lot of restrictions around that area already in place. And we want to make sure that we are not kind of encouraging more dense development there. Thirdly, and lastly, we don't want to pair, you can't pair compact with conservation or the voluntary mixed income incentive. So within that, you're already getting some bonuses within those two. And we want to make sure that you can't overlay those to get more, basically. Thought I saw, Alan, did somebody raise their hand? I thought I saw somebody had their hand raised.
Yeah,
yes.
let me look.
Joseph Margolis has his hand raised.
Hello, good morning, everybody. Good morning, Monica. Just quick question about the multiple parcels. What is the thinking behind not allowing the assemblage of multiple parcels? Because it seems like I remember it from the charrette, one of the ideas of centering it around adding, allowing for some enhancements around like neighborhood or activity centers. So typically around activity centers, there already is a lot of density in place and a lot of smaller parcels. So what is the thinking behind that part of it? Also just as a hunch, the voluntary mixed income incentives on their face, I'm not an economist, but just because you can get more density into a compact place than you can a conservation place. So I wouldn't even know if this is viable at all, but just because you can get more density into a compact place, I would think that from a business standpoint, it's more likely to be a viable option to get mixed income incentives, opportunities into the compact type of space where there's more opportunity. And I'm really not, I don't have a opinion on this yet. I'm just actually asking for clarification or just a a little bit more in depth. If it's something that can wait till later, I'm happy to that you were going to address later. I'm happy to wait. But those are my two questions.
No, that's a good question on the voluntary income piece. So just so everybody understands what Joseph is referring to is that within our conservation text amendment currently, we added on some modifications to the voluntary income, mixed income option, where instead of, and that is for developments 1 acre or more. So you would not, and so the addition that we made is instead of using one district different standards, you can use 2 districts standards. And so and you don't have to do that in exchange for any additional open space like you do in compact and in conservation. So to your point, if you have 50% of your lots or units that are affordable, you can use that tool. And we don't think that people would, that is enough of a carrot that you wouldn't use these tools anyways, because you would, that tool gives you more basically. So people who are doing affordable projects would likely use that tool, and that would be incentive enough. So I think that because you can do it at a smaller lot size, and also you're not providing additional open space to be able to get that incentive, because the kind of community benefit from that is the affordable housing itself, if that makes sense. Your first question, so we feel like you need to start with 2 acres. We ran some studies, and we can, I don't have any pulled up that I can show you, but we can kind of talk through when we get into the discussion piece about how that 2 acre assemblage might work. What we have heard pretty heavily from the community is this idea that you might have a full block of development that might be, 4 acres, and the middle of the block all get bought per se and then turned into this, really changes the character of that overall neighborhood. And that's not the intention of this tool. Okay, so other key questions that we want you guys to think about as we continue to go through this is that so right now in the compact development standards it's written as an additional 5% of common open space is required to be able to use the compact tool. So right now you have to have 15% green area is what it's called. And this would add an additional 5% of common open space with design standards attached to it, so that it's 50 by 50 minimum, so that it has certain features, and all of those are listed in it. So that's one question. We also want to have a conversation around setbacks, and I can talk through this when you see it, but we want to have a conversation around what front setbacks are appropriate, given that you're going to see a combination of rear loaded units, meaning units where the garage is in the back, and front loaded units, meaning where your garages are in the front. And do our setbacks make sense kind of when you take into account those standards? So for example, in all of our zoning districts, the way the driveway standards are is that if you have a front loaded driveway, meaning your garage is on the front of your house, then you have a minimum 20-foot driveway length, so that we are not blocking the sidewalk in front of your house. So when you see the setbacks, we just want to think through that. And is that the right number, given that where buildings are placed might be controlled by also the combination of those driveway standards. I want you guys to take some deep dive look at public streets versus open space and where buildings front. So meaning where units have their front door. Some of the feedback we've gotten is, should we require all the units to front on a public street, meaning their front door opens and you're on a public street? Or is it appropriate to allow some of those to be opening onto a green space? Right now in the current draft, we have 70% required to be on public streets and 30% maximum on open space. Just a reminder that some of the benefits of the public streets is that it falls under public maintenance. So CDOT's responsible to maintain those. We also get sidewalks on those and street trees on public streets or streets built to public standards. So those are some of the things that we've been thinking about and talking about. Also, as you go through, we want to focus on what the buffer is between these types of development and adjacent developments. So a landscape buffer B is a 25-foot buffer, so you have that between the development. Do we think that's appropriate, or do you want to match how far the adjacent development is set back? So for example, if it's 40 feet, then we require the compact development to be 40 feet. Some of the things to think about with that is who's maintaining the buffer? Is it the property owner or is it an HOA? Are people allowed to build accessory structures, meaning like an ADU in the backyard? You know, if we want to make sure that the buffer is actually a buffer. And then the last question, which is really a big one, is as you think through this and you see testing scenarios, is should we consider limiting triplexes within these larger developments? So like Allison mentioned, all the case studies that we've looked at, people have not been allowed or permitted to really build at large scale duplexes and triplexes, or if they have not done it thus far. And so we're really trying to wrestle with what the right balance is. And, you know, the current plans we're seeing are primarily triplexes. And the honest truth is that, you know, the standards we have set forth are going to get higher quality development in regards to streets, open space, tree save area, frontages. But the bottom line is there's still a big uptick in actual number of units. So you can make a lot of arguments around that some of that's positive for market supply. But again, some of that might also be seen as really allowing a lot more than was previously allowed. And if you're somebody who had a predictable, you know, thought you had a predictable view as to what might happen on those larger sites, this might be different from that. So I see I think there's a bunch in the chat. Should I pause for a second, Alan? I'm looking. We have I have those maps in the later on, so we can talk through that. Okay. So I want to just quickly, anybody have anything that is in regards to like what we've already seen and things that we're going to get to? I'm not going to pause on because we have those maps and stuff, so we can talk about that in a minute. Okay. So we have some of our friends and coworkers that work in subdivision on this call as well. And so they're going to help me out a little bit, explain, because I do think it's really important, although, you know, we're whatever, 9, 10 months in, 11 months into when the UDO became effective, for people to understand kind of how subdivision development works. I think it's important to understand what tools we were previously using. And previously we had 2 ways in which you could, you know, a developer who was doing an N1 development, there were 2 ways in which they could reduce their lot sizes and get smaller lot sizes. So I'm going to turn it over to Josh, per se. That's okay, Josh, if you're ready, to explain how those 2 worked. And one was basically used 95% of the time versus the other. Maybe that percentage is off, but I'll turn it over to you, Josh, if you can help me just walk through these 2 slides about where we came from.
Sure. As Monica said, in the previous zoning ordinance, we had 2 different ways to reduce lot sizes in new subdivisions. The first we called cluster. Cluster required that the project had a minimum size of 10 acres And with those 10 acres, you had to set aside 10% of the site as common open space. And when you did that, you could reduce your lot sizes from the required R3 minimum lot size of 10,000 square feet to 8,000 square feet. You could also reduce the lot width to 60 feet, and then the setbacks were reduced some too. The other way that you could reduce lot sizes was through the tree ordinance incentives. And the tree ordinance said that if you set aside 25% of the site in common open space, 25% of tree save in common open space, then you could reduce the lot sizes from R3 to the next lower zoning categories cluster. So from R3 cluster or R3 to R4 cluster, which was 6,000 square foot lot size. Those were 50 feet wide, and then you also had reduced setbacks that went along with it. And the tree safe cluster was really what was used the majority of the time as we develop new subdivisions.
Yeah. So what would you say the split was, Josh? You think, I mean, if you just had to guess, like in between the two tools and which was used to what frequency?
Because you have to set aside tree save anyway, adding another 10% tree save to 25% really was used the majority of the time.
Okay, so if you're tracking with this, so this is an example of what that pre-tree, so that R3 cluster might look like, right? So this is the tree ordinance cluster that was used, and you can see here kind of how people were laying out their tree save here. This is where the housing units were. The key thing to realize with this too is that so you could go from 10,000 square feet in lot size to 6,000 square feet in the tool that was most commonly used in what is today in 1A, right? So that was the big reduction. And then obviously, as Josh said, there were other setbacks and reductions that came with it. But a key fact of that was that you were still only doing single family housing in this scenario, right? So even with those reductions, you were getting a yield that was reflective of 1 unit per site, right? Similar to the example that I just showed, this example. Okay, so is everybody... So the most important thing, or not the most important thing, but to kind of remember as we track through this conversation is 10,000 to 6,000 was kind of the most commonly used trade-off, and then all the setbacks that associated with that.
And Monica, Eric had a quick question, and it was about this cluster provision. Eric, the main reason that we were providing incentives for reduced lot sizes was to allow for increased common open space in these subdivisions or increased tree save. And that's why we allowed for a reduced lot size in those new subdivisions.
And if you want to explain to when was I didn't ask you this before, so apologies if you don't know. When did the tree save, the original cluster happen at some point in time, and then the tree save cluster was done as part of the tree ordinance, just for historical information. In what time frame?
Monica, it was 2002 for the tree ordinance for single family provisions that were added to do this 15, 10, and 25.
Okay, so basically so that was in effect for whatever 21 years, basically, from 2002 to 2023, and was the tool that majority of development, very few people, right, were doing development and not using the cluster provision.
That's right.
Yeah, so pretty much everyone was using the cluster provision. Okay. So any other questions on how it used to work? Because I do think it's important. I know we're not in 2023 pre-UDO, but it's important for everybody to understand that like this is our history of kind of where we come from. Okay.
Sorry, it's Andrea. Can I just ask a question about with the tree save areas versus how stormwater would be looking at their runoff and water flow. How did that work? So trying to balance the tree saves with the clustering, with stormwater runoff, and were like BMPs, for example, considered as part of the open space? Can you explain a little bit how that would have worked, and then how it may work in the future?
So Andrea, in 2008 is when Stormwater implemented the post-construction stormwater controls provisions. So what that did was bring forth stormwater that was previously stormwater detention that was previously for commercial over to residential. So the way that manifested in implementation was that the development had either a low density or high density option, and the low density option said that they were going to hold to 24% impervious cover. So as long as they were maintaining that percent of built upon, there was no requirement assigned to build a BMP. So then once you went to the high density, then you would see those detention facilities being built, and yes, to your point, in common open space. And the only thing I would add about the tree save, when somebody was setting aside 25% of their site, they also had to do a perimeter protection on the exterior lots if they were going to reduce down to this threshold. If not, the exterior lots went back up to that previous zoning category. So 25%, you got to think about if they were doing this, then there was a 20-foot buffer around the developer. So whatever size that was, then the remaining of that tree save still had to go in somewhere with some open space. So they had a stream configured along those buffers. That this really was giving some transition between what was existing neighboring, but also, as Josh referred to, enhancing canopy and protection with what was along buffers or environmentally sensitive areas. So it did kind of balance out with them holding 24%, and very few situations in single family detached went above 24% coverage for the whole entire area when you looked at the quarter of the site is in open space and not being built upon.
All right, thanks. It's yeah, it's quite complex, and I think every development would have to be looked at differently, given the topography and other constraints. So I guess then I will wait further into the presentation to hear how that might be affected if increasing the densities through the compact development may end up requiring more BMPs, et cetera. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving pieces too. So I think that's why we wanted to kind of set the frame around this history and how it might layer together, because I think that's important as we move towards compact and where we're going, like that people understand kind of where we came from, and anyways, how we're transitioning through that with trees, stormwater, lot sizes, unit types. I mean, there's, how we actually plat the land, meaning how we lay out the site, has a lot of impact on all those things. So you have to kind of look at it holistically. Matt, I see your hands raised.
Yeah. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I appreciate all this history because, in many ways, this helps sort of bring us back to where we were. I mean, one of the things that, we've seen as a design firm is the larger lot widths are not what the market has historically looked for. And there's, outsized cost. If you have a lot of lot frontage, there's a lot of road cost for each lot. And so, being able to shrink those lot widths down helps work towards more affordability. And to answer Andrea's BMP question, I mean, the BMPs are all kind of tied to how much runoff you have. And I think it's something that just normally gets accommodated through the detailed design. That's all. But thanks.
Okay, so on our continued road down history lane here, I wanted to also just make sure everybody really understands again where we are today with conservation development. Now, this is all proposed to change when it goes, if council votes on it on May 20th. But I want people to understand that this is where we are today with conservation. So what you see on the right with that table, all of that table can be reduced by 50% if you provide 10% in common open space. You can also front lots on the open space in today's conservation. So for example, that 10,000 foot lot becomes a 5,000 foot lot. That minimum lot width residential becomes 35 feet. And then that carries through to all the setbacks with that extra 10% of common open space. Now, again, this is proposed to change, but this is the standards that have been in place for the past 9-10 months, right? So this is the numbers you're looking at. So for example, if you're just to focus in on this N1 right here and all of the things in this column right here, and you track that back. So today, that's a 5,000 square foot lot if you're using the conservation development tool. Pre June 1st, 2023, that was a 6,000 square foot lot if you were using the tree save cluster. So if you're just tracking that metric, now there's other metrics too, right? About like how wide the lot is, where it sits on the lot, but you can kind of see the pattern. So the first version of cluster was 8,000 square feet for that N1 lot right there. The second version of cluster, which was in place for 21 years, was 6,000 square feet. And then the third version, which is what we've had in place for the past 10, 11 months, is that 5,000 square feet. So you can see here as that tracks, and you can see this is how this shows the lot sizes and the lot widths and the maximum building coverages. This shows the setback. So all of these dimensions could be reduced by 50% with the use of that conservation tool. Now there's some nuance in that around the corners and rear, but for basic understanding, you could reduce by 50% those in what we have seen, and front on open space. So those are the two major differentials with the extra 10% provided. So is everybody still tracking on this? Any questions on this? Okay, so now let's get into what we are proposing. So what we are proposing is that and what we have in the current draft today, which again, this is what we are proposing. We have a couple of tweaks we want to test with you all, is that compact is a new by right development option that allows smaller lot sizes. So similar to the stuff we just saw, right? The pre-UDO cluster. So again, the current draft today has an additional 5% of common open space included. You have to do 15% in all development. And you can see here what the proposed minimum lot sizes and widths are in as we have proposed today for N1A, B, C, D. So they do mimic what is allowed, those smaller lot sizes, and some flexibility around how you lay those out. So again, they would not be allowed in the protected critical watershed or the airport noise overlay. What you see on the right, all the blue parcels are the parcels that are over 2 acres. The way it works out is that we would be, I have the percentages, I can pull them back up, but if you look at this bottom acreage inside and acreage outside of overlays, you can see that for the ETJ, it's about half and half, what's inside and what's outside. So that means you would not be allowed to use this tool in about half of the ETJ, really focus on that western side, where there are those protected watersheds in that protected area. And then when you add in the airport noise overlay and the watersheds, it's about 1,500 acres of the 6,000 or so that are developable within the city. And then the ETJ, again, it's about half. So this shows you where that this tool would be allowed. One thing I just want to put on your radar, and we'll come back to it. We showed this to council, but is that we want to have a conversation around townhouses, which Joseph, you mentioned that earlier in phase 3. But that's not necessarily tied to this map. That would be tied closer to the centers mapping. And again, that would be a conversation we would have in this phase 3 over the summer. So I'll pause here. I think there were questions in the chat earlier about specifically this map, but I'm happy to answer anything you have related to this and where you would be allowed to do it.
Derek.
Okay, just making sure. So Monica, I just wanted you to verify. So there would be 2,472 acres in the ETJ that would be allowed currently, and that looks like it's mostly southwest, far east, northeast corner, right?
Yeah, and that's definitely something we want feedback on, is to how everyone feels about that. Good idea, bad idea, where are there, because there are, there's a lot of property out in this further east portion, and some out here that you were just mentioning too. So that's something we want feedback on. But yes, that is where the majority of it is in that northeast, southeast area.
Okay. And one thing, just maybe if I could add, I think it was Rob's question about why the assemblage. I can't remember who asked or who made the comment, but why have that limitation? And I think it goes back to this map, right? It's the knowns versus the unknowns. Right now, you know what the 2-acre parcels are and where they're located. And if you gave the ability to do assemblage, this map would be useless, correct?
Yeah. Yes,
Okay.
that is a very good point. Yes. Is that if we did not do the assemblage piece, then yes, it could be anywhere. I think we have learned the hard way too that people want predictability and where things are going to happen and how, and that, nothing will be written in stone forever and ever. It's something we can obviously see how it evolves over time and tweak if we need to. But I think we feel comfortable with this as a predictable starting point. And the market also has that as a predictable starting point for knowing where it's able to be used.
Yeah, and maybe I could just add that the predictability is a trade-off for like upzoning without going through a rezoning process.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point. And I've been trying to continue to remind people, and I have not done it on this call yet, but I do think it's a really important point to make sure everybody knows that none of these things preclude somebody from rezoning a property from N1 A to N2A, or to having a community conversation around more density. So that's always like a door B that exists, right? There's always the legislative process. There's always the ability to rezone a property and have a community conversation around where things are appropriate and where things are not appropriate. So that's a great point, and one that we probably should continue to make, that what we are talking about is what is allowed without a rezoning process, what is allowed by right.
And Monica, just my last comment, maybe a door C, is I'll take this opportunity to plug once again that a realignment zoning process some point in the future could also be helpful.
Yes. No, that's a very good point. After we get through the community area planning process and have the policy map adopted, then we will be starting the alignment rezoning process. I think we're looking and testing what areas, how to phase that. So I do think that will be really important, is what the phasing of that looks like and which place types are most appropriate to begin that process, to do first. And then how we phase it there out. So that's going to be 2025 will be a lot of the conversations around that. If we stay on schedule and are able to kind of keep working this through. Any other questions on this? I'll keep moving. Okay, so this here shows what we are proposing for the standards for N1A, B, C, and D in regards to those same charts that we just showed. So minimum lot size N1A is 5,000. Then B, C, and D, you can see kind of how that tracks across. Once you get down to C and D, there really isn't a differential. That has to do with kind of what appropriate lot sizes are and also where they're mapped. We don't have a large amount of N1D currently mapped in the city, and we don't really see a big differential between those two. And then you can see here what the front setbacks proposed would be. I will just make a note here that these are, so currently when you reduce by, I'm trying to do the math on conservation, these are a little bit bigger, but this gets to what I was mentioning before. So this image here on the right, I'm not sure, this is in Cornelius, and this is a setback of about 3 feet, 5 feet, and you can see it's rear loaded. So there's an alley in the back and you park in the back. This number 5 can seem a little bit like, wow, that's not a lot. But when you rear load, it gives you the ability to have that shallower setback in the front. Again, as I mentioned earlier, if you front load, meaning you're accessing your garage from the front of the house, our other driveway standards are going to push you to have more space. So it really would look more like 20 feet unless you're building the house out front and the garage further back, if that makes sense. So I'll pause here on this and see if there are any questions. Okay.
Monica, with the backload, this is Carolyn, with the backload alley, does that mean that now the homeowner is responsible for that upkeep of the alley, as you were mentioning, or?
Yes, so that is a good question. So the homeowners association are responsible for the backload of the alley. The difference is in maintenance costs is that when it's not your primary drive or entrance, it's a different cost and load and maintenance frequency than if what we were seeing in the prior conservation is no public street in the front. So meaning all your services and all the traffic is coming from that private alley. So it is a little bit of a different cost when you are rear loading it in a more traditional neighborhood sense than if that's the only access, if that makes sense, because that means like every dump truck, every tow truck, every person in and out of their house is using that alley versus like, as you can see in this picture, like your visitors are parking in the front. If you have a 2-car household, one person might park in the front and one person might park in the back. And so anyways, it's just a different usage level. And so it yields kind of a different maintenance responsibility.
Thank you. Yeah, that makes sense. I just want to make sure.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you.
No, that's really helpful. And what we don't want to do is, at least in my opinion, what we don't want to do is outlaw what we would consider kind of traditional urban walkable development, which is like what's shown here. This is a new development, but it's built off the patterns of, traditional neighborhoods like a Plaza Midwood or an Elizabeth or, ones that kind of have that pattern already. So we're trying to balance that maintenance and usage of alleys with what is kind of considered a more walkable built environment,
Yeah, I like that. And it also leaves, you don't end up with a concrete front yard trying to get these things developed for the community. So thank you.
Yeah, when somebody's walking, their stroller around the neighborhood, they're not crossing a driveway every 20 feet.
Right.
Yeah. Oops. Okay, so just some reminders on kind of where we are, where we're going is a compact residential development. Again, this is a development option in the neighborhood 1 zoning districts. It allows for that reduction in lot size in exchange for higher quality open space. And there are some key differences between the kind of new compact, and I'm calling it old conservation, but it's basically like what's on the books today, is that you have 70% of units in compact have to face a public street. You have new standards for common open space that are in the current draft of conservation that are carried through to the current draft of compact. And you have some setbacks, lot sizes that are just slightly different, more tailored to this residential development. So we've been working at this pretty extensively for the past 2 weeks. More than that. How long? Laura, Alan, month and a half maybe. But in the past 3-4 weeks, we've had a lot more public design sessions around it, I guess I should say. So we had a big session on April 19th, I believe it was, where you might see familiar faces. Some of y'all might be in some of these images, where we really started testing out our proposed standards and looking at what the yields would be, how sites would be laid out. We had great participation. I think there were like 30 or 40 people by the end of the day. We had 4 council members there. And this is just some of the things we learned from that charrette. We considered that was where we ended up allowing some percentage of units to front on open space and kind of figuring out how to balance that. Again, Carolyn, to your point, is like, how do we balance this maintenance home ownership cost issue with what some may consider good design too? So we want to balance that. Consider allowing that flexibility in lot sizes between width and length. So trying to not be as prescribed so that there is some flexibility with the lot sizes based on what the units are themselves. And then consider some buffer flexibility. So how are we treating the adjacency and the edges between the development and the neighboring development? So you can see here, this was some of the drawings from it. I'm not really going to speak too much of it. We could spend the whole time talking about that. And then I'm just going to quickly run through some of the testing that we've done and some of the things we've learned today. So if you've been watching lots of council meetings, you've seen these drawings before, but I'm going to talk through these a little bit with the with where compact is today in mind. So take this development here, which is off Youngblood, and we have tested it. I think we've tested this development to death at this point. We have tested it with pre-UDO base standards. We've tested it with cluster, that 10-acre plus cluster. We've tested it with cluster with tree save. We've tested it with the current conservation, which is what's on the books today. We've tested it with the proposed conservation, which will be on the books on May 20th, if passed. And then we've now gone back and tested it with the compact development standards as proposed. So you can see here, and we've tested it with proposed compact with, I think we at this point have 6 or 7 different designers who have tested it. So we've tested it with multiple lenses on that last one. And so you can see here kind of what the difference in yields are. So this is just based on the actual number of units. So everything ranging from 115 all the way up to kind of current conservation, which is that 203, and then back down to where it's still more than what you were getting kind of pre-UDO with cluster, but not as high as this current conservation. I will say here that one factor, and I'll flip to I'll flip to the next to show you what the compact looks like. But one factor here that is important, and I put this asterisk here, is to remember is that with that unit yield is also higher quality open space, so more requirements around the actual open space. There is a higher requirement for public streets and roads. So there's some trade-off there in that unit count where it's not just an apples to apples of current conservation to proposed compact, right? Because there's other qualities that have higher thresholds to them, including the open space, the streets, the road network, and some of the tree sidewalk requirements that kind of go along with that. So this is hard to read, but I'll say these are the two compacts that we just got. I also will say that we tested these with just duplexes and then triplexes on the corner, which is our recommendation and kind of where we're headed towards with some of the phase 3 stuff and potentially with some of the compacts. So we wanted to show you what that looked like if you were to just use duplexes with triplexes on the corner. So if you were to front load all the units, meaning all the garages are in the front, the yields we were getting is about 175. And if you were to rear load, meaning you have all alleys as secondary, meaning so here you can see some alleys as secondary, then they were able to get about 188. So we're able to kind of see what those look like. We also, some of our outside designers, again, some people who are on this call today, also tested this site here, and we're getting anywhere ranging from 200 to 300 in that same scenario. Now, I will note that the 300, I believe, I don't know if that was exactly following per se all of the recommendations or was just looking at like full yield as to how much you could get. As a maximum. So you can see here, like that doesn't include all duplexes. If you look really closely at the lotting pattern, it includes some triplexes in it too. So these two were more on the low end of that in the 200 range. So you can see here kind of this was what some other additional designers looked at. I just also want to remind you too that if you were looking at, and you saw this slide before when we talked about conservation, that some of the things that we're trying to solve are this overabundance of alleys here that would not be allowed in the new compact. This would bust on the new compact in having too many units fronting on open space here. So you wouldn't be able to do it that way. You would have to have the common open space more spread throughout the development, and you would have to ensure that it meets that 50 by 50 standards, which, for example, in this doesn't. This is a 30 foot wide standard. So just to remind, this was some of the concerns we had with conservation, and with compact, we are working to kind of alleviate some of those while still having the higher density. So I'll pause there, and then we'll do a recap and timeline. I'm just looking to see if I see anything. Okay, this is really good feedback. I'm just reading y'all's feedback in the chat. I think we're cataloging it all, but yeah, the kind of the limitations around the open space, making sure we have higher quality, giving some flexibility where there's some amount of open space allowed, but not maybe
Hello?
a full amount. Okay, this is good. So let me talk through the timeline and we can come back to these. And I'm going to pull back up the discussion questions for us to dive into. So May, we're here today, May 9th. Our goal is to file the text amendment. The deadline for text amendments is May 24th. We're still making some ongoing tweaks. You guys have the latest draft. We're working to schedule some community engagement meetings in later May around this text amendment. We have the TPD committee update will be on June 3rd, which will likely include some updates around this. We'll continue with that public engagement. We have a June 17th hearing. So just to clarify, whatever we file on May 24th will be what we take to hearing on June 17th. We will then schedule a zoning committee recommendation before the June 24th decision. Again, a reminder, this is the same schedule here, just show you where we are with the phasing of everything. And then let's dive into the key questions, which I like that some of you guys have already answered some of them in the chat that I can tell, but I'm going to leave these up on the screen. And then if you want to raise your hand, come off mute. Alan's going to help me moderate the order in which we do it. But I'm hoping we can get some feedback on these questions, basically, which is many of them are included in the current draft compact. Nobody wants to say anything? You guys have put a lot of things in the chat. We can also just pull from there and keep on going. Okay.
I've got a question from Carolyn on flood zones. Maybe Shannon or Josh could help with that one.
Well, Carolyn, the flood zones are taken into account by our stormwater group. They have their own requirements as far as where you can build and how you can mitigate for them, but they're very much a case-by-case basis.
Okay, so if they're established flood zones by FEMA, even though they have their own requirements, there is still a possibility of a developer coming in and building in the flood zones?
No, they have to get a floodplain development permit, Carolyn. So as a part of the review process, it shows the limits of the floodplain. Then what offset do they have? What are they grading? And all that's assessed per the floodplain regulations to assure that it's not being violated with what's being built.
Okay, so they have to go by the required buffers and everything else that are setbacks from the flood zone.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Thank
Sure.
you.
Monica, Matt Langston has his hand up.
Okay. Matt.
Hi, sorry. I think the first, so my initial I was out of the office, but when I initially read the comments, I think that not being able to aggregate parcels was going to be an issue, and I'm not 100% sure. So being able to, start with 2 acres and then stick other lots on to there, because I think Douglas has had some comments in the chat about, a lot of times grandma sells an acre to, grandkid, and Aunt Mabel gets 3/4 of an acre or whatever. And then when they're ready to develop their property, it gets all aggregated together. I think it remains to be seen whether 2 acres is the right number in terms of an aggregation. But the fact that, we're at least starting, rather than prohibiting being able to stick parcels together, which I hope wasn't the original intent. I think, we can at least start with 2 acres. It feels like it ought to be less. I know that before there was a 2-acre minimum project size to be able to unlock some of those denser parcels, the smaller lot sizes. But anyway, that's my only comment.
No, I think that's received, and I think something we are continuing to look at. I think we're balancing, obviously, the things we're hearing coming out of neighborhoods currently with predictability and a new tool that we know is still going to yield pretty high density intensity, especially when you layer on like the flexibility with uses. So really trying to make sure we're predictable around that. But
yeah, that's fair. I think also in practice, I think it's going to be really tough. Because if you have like a recombination plat, you take 4, half-acre parcels, and then stick them together, not subject to the subdivision ordinance. You have 2 acres. Is that a project or is that not? I think it may be really hard to enforce.
Yeah, that's some of the logistics I think we're trying to internally work out and talk about right now, is like how to word that in a way that we can actually enforce it. I mean, because we can all say, yeah, I mean, we have to be able to enforce it, basically. We have to be able to have a way that has that predictability and enforcement piece. So I appreciate that. Okay. Who's next, Alan?
Joseph.
Sorry, I was muted. So I'm wondering, and again, I'm just wondering what the efficacy of having the assemblage clause along like major transit corridors inside of, say, TODs. I mean, there's probably very few 2-acre parcels left in most TODs. Um, um, are there other tools? I mean, I guess they wouldn't, I guess they wouldn't, they would probably be something bigger like Into or something, but maybe some of the, neighborhoods nearby beyond, like if it's a neighborhood center beyond a quarter of a mile. Like it just seems like the closer you are to an activity center or to a transit corridor, it should be easier to get that kind of density because, like for example, that's probably one of the few places in Charlotte where like those 5-on-1 apartments really work. It seems, you see them all over the place, even though they're not my favorite development, they work. So it should be easier for
Joseph,
developers to do that.
keep in mind, like these N1 districts are not in the TOD areas. That's those densities are much higher in those areas already, and this would not apply. Like because we already have a very dense zoning district around the TOD areas.
Yeah,
Yeah, when we alignment rezoned those.
I caught myself with that. I guess what comes to mind is say, I don't know if anybody along this corridor would be interested, but like West Sugar Creek between 85 and Grand Street, there's on the Royal Oak side, there's a lot of parcels on the Royal Oak side. So what if those people wanted to like come together and create a project or sell for a project? That would be an area that would actually be along Sugar Creek, probably more ideal for more intense housing development on that street. And it would actually enhance the downtown Derrida, the viability of downtown Derrida, kind of getting becoming a more viable neighborhood center. And I would like to see something like that, development like that easier along those types of corridors, maybe. And even if you're going to consider this elsewhere, but for busy transportation corridors like that, it might make sense.
I think that's a good perspective. And I see there's some comments in the chat too related to whether that number should go lower or whether there's differing opinions on whether that's appropriate or not. So we can take that into context as we consider, as we continue to revise and think through what that applicability looks like. Douglas, I think it's your turn. And then I want to make sure we have time to talk about the duplexes, triplexes, that last question, because I think that that's a really important question for this compact and we don't want to leave it on the table and not have time for it. So let's do Douglas, your comments, and then let's jump into that.
Thank you, Monica. Joseph and Matt kind of stole a little bit of my thunder with my comments. I would like to see that minimum acreage down to almost zero in certain parts of town, in particular along arterials and near activity centers. That would seem to be places where we would want to encourage this development and put the least amount of roadblocks in the way. And there are some places, there's an arterial down near me, there's a church, it's meets the right criteria almost. And it's like, if somebody were to be able to go and add a little bit of extra land to that and assemble, then I would hope we would make that as easy as possible. So, when the fingers or hands go up to say lower the assemblage size, I'm all about having zero for that lot size, and again, adding the locational criteria. I'm not totally in love with that, but near activity centers and arterials, I think we need to make that easy. So those are my comments.
Okay, thank you for that. I have them written down and recorded as two potential ideas, things to look at. Yeah, I mean, I think we recognize that our old cluster started with 2 acres, so that seems to make sense and be a common kind of assemblage trigger. And then also, I mean, what I was saying to Eric earlier is I think we're going to look at it now, but then also recognizing the fact that this might evolve over time as we see things come out of the ground, and we might revisit the criteria and the parcel assemblage issue as we see stuff coming through development and its appropriateness. So we can always take a look at it later. Okay, duplexes and triplexes. And should we consider allowing triplexes on the corners only? I want to get y'all's thoughts on that. In our site testing, we kept coming back to that as like a core principle kind of use, because in reality, you're seeing a lot higher density with the triplexes on the table for larger parcels. And we want to understand if we should consider taking triplexes off in compact developments so that you're allowed to do duplexes everywhere and triplexes on corners in specifically compact development. And we are asking as a consideration. So our recommendation is that is citywide in phase 3. I think we want to understand, is that something we should consider to do in phase 2 as part of compact specifically, just when looking at the full range of what's in compact.
I think if we allow the diversity of style in the compact, like I think aesthetically, I hear they're wanting to put the triplexes on the ends, but I think that in some of the examples, we don't see it here in Charlotte, but there are some of the triplexes that are stacked triplexes that could work in a compact. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I would be interested in what others think about that. We have not thought about it in that way, that you might allow stacked, you might differentiate between triplexes in that way in this space.
Yeah, it's not popular in Charlotte. You don't really see a lot of stack, but if you're sort of, maybe challenging some folks to come with some creativity or something in that could potentially be, could potentially be an option just to think about that.
This is Douglas. I will agree with Angela. That is, I think, an excellent way for us to get some additional density, and we're going up instead of out and around, and that's the cheapest way to go in a certain aspect there. And I would agree with that, and like to see that developed around me. So there's that.
Yeah. Do you want me? Okay. I'm just going to pull back up to this. So this is the one that shows, these are the all duplex version, just so you can see. And then this is like how you could get it with the triplexes. Any other thoughts on that? I've taken notes about the stacked versus
Monica, are the triplexes in the alternative concept are not stacked, or
no?
Okay? So
these are not stacked.
Yeah. Do we have a testing where we've said what happens if we put stacked triplexes into this adventure and didn't restrict them to just being on a corner, but added them in some kind of stylistic way to the project? What would the yield be, and is that something that we can show people to say, here's perhaps a different way of looking at it? And I realize that so I'm just throwing that out there as an idea.
Yeah, we did do a version with stacked quads, which it's probably pretty close to what the stacked triplex was. We don't have a typical stacked triplex footprint, but we could, anyways. I mean, we could work to, if there's energy around
Okay.
that, we could probably work to develop one.
The stacked quads will probably suffice. Just, the notion that you can achieve some additional density there and additional yield is a positive that I think would probably work for the community a little bit.
Yeah, I feel like the stack quads would, I mean, the stack tries or stack quads, it doesn't, I think that might, I don't know if that's something that really needs to be thought through in phase 3, if we have enough time to really have a thorough conversation around the nuances between all that currently, but I mean, we can take a look at it. Any other thoughts on the triplexes, duplexes, and thoughts around it? Okay, I'm going to move on to generally where we are thinking major changes would come in since our last draft that was sent to you is in the conversations we've had through council with community members, the volume of emails that we're receiving, the perspectives that we're hearing from a variety of people. And these are some of the big recommendations we are considering bringing into the filing draft of the text amendment. So I think we just had a good conversation around the triplexes and triplexes on corners or potentially stacked. We are to put us closer in line with where we were with cluster and also getting more of that quality open space. We are proposing to add an additional 5% so that you're getting 10% in total quality open space in addition to the 15% tree save. We are thinking that the landscape buffer B, which is a 25-foot buffer between any adjacent N1A place type, would be required. So right now we have an option of either, in the draft, you have an option of either the landscape buffer B or the rear yard of the underlying district. We're thinking of dropping that option and just doing the landscape buffer B. And then again, we would stick with the same thing we have in the draft, which is that minimum 70% fronting on public streets, maximum 30% fronting on open space. So that is what we are thinking. I think we have some feedback around the applicability, the uses, and really taking in that the applicability meaning how you assemble property and looking closer at that around that locational criteria. We've heard the feedback on the triplexes. I think we're going to get to work thinking through and kind of talking through how we might balance all the things that we've heard thus far. We are going to continue to stick and work on this timeline. So just a refresher on the timeline is this is the timeline for both phase 1 and phase 2. We are about right here at UAC. And so just so everybody is aware, we have this council decision on the 20th. We put these in as placeholders, still working to get the info session times settled on the compact, but we'll make sure you guys are the first to know. And then we are going to continue to kind of work through this. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and get us to a place where we can have some more conversation if we'd like to based off that.
We've got Matt Langston and then Andrea.
Hey, Monica, excuse me, could you put your screen back up and go back one slide? I wanted better understand what you were saying about the 25-foot buffer. Were you saying that that's only going to be required when you are adjacent to N1A?
It would be only when you're required to N1 districts. Correct, Laura? I think Laura's on the phone.
Okay, could you pull that slide back up, please? I just want
Yeah.
to make sure
Let me pull it back up.
I'm crystal clear. Because
And
one of the things
Monica,
we'd also
in
kicked
one.
Oh,
around.
yeah, it says in 1A, but it's really in one here. Okay.
Yeah, and it's in one place type.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, that's not in one
Right.
zoning. Yeah.
Okay.
Let me.
Now we'd kicked around in some spaces about growing that 25 feet to 30 and allowing it to be used as green space. Does that still exist? Or is that?
Yes, it does.
Okay. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, here you go. Sorry. I wanted to make sure I did it the right way.
Yeah,
Can you guys see it?
the third bullet down.
Yeah. I just quickly, it's the intention is in one. That was a typo on it's in one place type.
Okay, so maybe it's only require landscape buffer requirements. Well, I'm not going to wordsmith, but okay, thank you.
Yeah, meaning like you would not have you would not have the option to do this or the rear yard. You would just do this. Does that make sense? But you could use it. You could increase it to 30, like you were saying.
Okay, so you don't have the option of deeper setbacks, deeper rear yards. If you're adjacent N1, you have to do the buffer.
Yes, and we're still, when we send out the new draft, which I'm not going to make promises. Laura can help me on when we think we'll have it, but we were just talking this morning about some other conditions around that landscape buffer B that we need to kind of talk through that would be in that draft to make sure it's really clear what you can and can't do in the buffer.
Okay, thank you.
Andrea?
Andrea has her hand raised.
Thank you. I appreciate the discussion and the various viewpoints today, and I can really tell that the staff teams have been listening to some of the comments coming in from all parts of the city and ETJ as well, and it's really welcomed and very timely. I'm wondering, I have a couple questions. One is in terms of the time frame of getting this through a decision for June. Is that because of the projects that are vested in the queue versus unvested projects? Does that help clarify things for things that are in the pipeline versus staff's ability to manage projects if this amendment takes place?
Yeah, I can talk through that a little bit, and if Allison, you want to chime in. So because of the loophole quality of development that we're seeing with conservation as it exists today, and the volume we're seeing is we are very committed to closing that loophole as soon as possible. And so, and it feels, things can always change, but it feels like there's our elected officials are also very committed to that, both on the county side and on the city side, and that there is a desire to kind of get that higher quality. And as we are committed to providing compact as a way to have predictability for those that were maybe considering conservation, and we want to have a development tool that still works for other developments, right? That are kind of in the process. The development process can take many, many months. And people are, there's money involved, there's all these things involved. And we want to have a tool that is in place that we feel like gets the level of quality that is desired while meeting that modern lot size housing supply issue. As quickly as possible. We would be concerned having 3 or 4 months of not having any predictability around what tools there are available and how those tools might be applied to sites. So we are in good faith trying to work towards a place where, it's not going to be perfect for everyone. We understand that everyone is not going to be happy, but that we get that higher level quality and the right kind of trade-offs for density, quality, maintenance in the compact draft and in the compact what is adopted. So that's really what is keeping us on that June timeline, it is trying to have the smallest gap possible between kind of closing one door and opening another, if that makes sense.
And yeah, and I'll add really quick too, we've got just a procedural reality in that on June the 25th, council is off until they come back again on August the 19th. And so during that time period, I mean, there's very little action. We'll be doing engagement and things like that, but we wouldn't be moving something forward while council's on break. So that factors in as well.
Okay. Thank you. And then the other question I had is, because this is so much to process, and I want to make sure that I'm understanding, and it was probably on one of the slides, and I can go back and keep doing my homework on that. But so the compact tool you're suggesting would not be available in the airport noise overlay or in the watershed, the protected watershed areas. And so what are the tools then that would be available still in those overlay districts?
That's a great,
yeah. And what's the density impact? What's given the acreage that's available in those areas?
Yeah, so the two tools that would still remain on the ground available, and hold on, I'm just going to leave it in this mode so you can see it. But so is this existing kind of base development standards and this conservation, the new version of conservation, which requires 40% preservation of green area. So you can go to the yield slide. So those two are still allowed in the city in its entirety. Now, what we see is that those sites lower than 2 acres, the base development is likely to be the tool that the small sites like a neighborhood extent, those are going to be where you use that base development standards, meaning like it's a couple lots, it's a few lots that already exist. The conservation is likely the tool that, again, I mean, we're not developers, but we are making some kind of best case assumptions, expectations. So is that they would be, like this is how the yield was in this. So that was about 170 with the proposed, but that you would be able to use that tool, conservation, in that protected watershed airport noise overlay area. So depending on, I think, what will happen, and again, people who are on the call that do development in across the city might have more perspectives on this, but I mean, I'm assuming that you're going to test a site for both and figure out kind of which one is more appropriate. So if you have more topography, if you have a creek on your site, then you're probably going to lean towards conservation because you already have a lot of space that can't be developed. And then if you had a more flat site, then base development might end up being your preferred alternative. But basically, you're just not allowed to use compact. You would use the other two options. You would choose between the other two based on your site. Now, you have to be over a certain acreage for conservation. So that is about 5 acres for conservation. So again, then anything less than 5 acres for conservation also would end up being the base standards.
Okay. So based on that table, what I'm understanding is that previously where you would have had, say, an R3 to an R4 cluster development accessible as a tool, now you're showing essentially what would have been R3 to like an I'm going to call it R4.4 because I saw the 4.4 number on your table. So it's not that different.
Yeah, I mean,
so the old
every
cluster...
site's a little different, but yeah, it's probably pretty similar. It's probably pretty similar to what you were experiencing pre-June 1, 2023. Now, a layer of complexity of that is the duplex triplex amendment. So just to be cognizant is that does change that equation. It's not necessarily a doubling of density when you go from single family to duplexes because you have different lot sizes, but it is a percentage increase, right? Like if you were to do all duplexes, anyways, there's a gain there, if that makes
Sure.
sense. So it
Sure.
depends on the site, and depends on kind of what the building type is, like how big the actual building is that a builder is using.
Okay, that helps me a lot. Thanks, Monica.
You're welcome. Joseph, did you have something?
Yeah.
And then
Yes. Hi. Just had a quick question. In terms of the compact development standards and with all the setbacks, with all the requirements on there, what what considerations have gone into making sure that the product is going to be desirable to the owner of the land there, to continue on with a project by rights rather than requesting for a zoning to into, which would then get into the thing of that, which is of course an additional cost that goes into development, which gets passed on to the homeowners. Have you guys considered that? Because like uh, a, a, a planner once told me something, a group of us something that just resonates with me. Like the best way to control the land is if you want to control the land, the best thing to do is own it. And so we're kind of a bunch of us here, non-owners. Some of us may be owners, uh, really trying to do our best to, within the law, help, manage that as best we can. But still, they have the option to rezone or to petition rezoning. And so I was just wondering about that.
I mean, we, as part of the charrette process that we've now had kind of two, I think we're hearing pretty clearly from the development industry about current projects that they have, viability of them, how these might impact things. So I feel like we're in a good place. The last pulse check we did was people were feeling pretty good about where we were and balancing that higher quality with kind of developability. If others have more perspectives that they want to put forward on that, we're happy to meet with them and talk about them offline. And just to kind of wrap it up on that front, anybody on this call or that isn't on this call that wants to understand how compact might work or what the impacts might be of compact on a development, how the standards might look, we're happy to kind of have that conversation with people and continue to make sure it's as clear as possible given the technical nature of it, so that people do have a good understanding about what by right development may look like on property they either own or adjacent property to their community. So we really appreciate all of y'all's feedback. I think it is our intention and goal to really balance all of the perspectives and issues that we've heard, and with a market sense in mind and a predictability for communities and neighborhoods so that everyone has a known outcome and what is possible on sites that they may own or live near. So I feel like we are a little over time. And so I do want to just be cognizant of that. And as people kind of start to have to drop off, that we wrap it up, basically. Wrap it up and save our comments for next time. I think we'll work to get another UAC scheduled if need be before compact. And we'll have additional items coming to you all. If you have comments, feedback, things that you didn't get to talk about today, please email myself and Laura and Allison those. We would love to hear them. Yeah, let us know if you have additional questions. We have a lot of technical experts on the call that can really dive into the weeds of these things if need be, and we're happy to kind of talk through them. Okay, anything else? We're going to wrap it up today. You guys have a wonderful rest of your Thursday. Thank you again for all your time.
Thank you, guys.